Ay, guys. I'm dying from hanging. Let's try here. This is my first meal here in Livingston. As you can see, proper chicken with rice.
Una idea.
De Julio.
De Julio, el papá de Enrique.
Señor Vinicio, si tú sigues cantando así, entiendo mucho trabajo.
Guys, this is Julio Iglesias, the father of Enrique Iglesias. And they say, back in the 70s, they made the video clip of Iglesias here, in Livingston. Es verdad, ¿no?
Quiero enseñarte un camino en el mar.
From Spain, he came here just for the video clip. That's insane.
Instead of talking about their culture, they're taking them to the tourist places.
Who?
The kids that take the tourists.
Ah, the guides.
Yeah, they're taking them not to their culture. They're giving them money because this way we live divided. The blacks live that way. The foreigners built their hotels in that end.
Ah, so this is where the local lives?
The locals live, but they're not talking about come see us.
Why?
They're giving the credence to the foreigner. And they build their casa iguana, casa rosada, casa this. That's all Gringo. So the kids are not selling
The real Livingston, which is there.
the real Livingston. This is the only place where blacks live.
Black people only here in Livingston.
Only here in Guatemala. This is unique.
So only here there are black people, only here.
Only here in
No,
Guatemala.
aquí no Maya, nothing.
No, Mayas came here before.
So what's the story of this place? The story.
Let me tell you this story because I am a historian here. I am 69 years old.
Historian.
I'm a historian here. I'm in all the internet, all the books.
Really?
I'm Philip Flores.
So what happened in this place, the history?
The history here was the blacks was here first. When the Civil War in Guatemala, all the Mayans come running here because this was safe.
So black people came here first, from Africa.
Yeah, no, we're not Africa. We're not Africa.
Jamaica? No.
Neither. Jamaicans are Africa. Jamaica, Cuba,
Africans.
Haiti, they're Africa. We are Caribs. The Caribbean Sea was named for us.
Really? I have no idea about
But
that.
I am telling you because so you know. We are Caribs. My identity here is Garifuna. It's the only place where you find Garifuna in this hemisphere.
So you don't have DNA from Africa, nothing. Everything is from Caribbean.
When the Africans jump ship, when they come around the Cape Horn, some of them jump ship, but they couldn't run to the Inca, the skin.
The skin.
So they couldn't run to the Maya. The skin is different. The only people that look closely like them was us, the Caribs, and they came and mixed with us.
Ah, so you were here first, the black people were here, and then they mixed with Africans because the Mayas and they didn't like them.
No, they couldn't mix. You see, if a slave ship come and they see a black within the Maya, they know he was a runaway.
They know he ran away from the Spanish.
From the ship.
But here you mix and you're one of them. So you protect all the slaves.
Complete.
Really?
They live with us, we inhabit some of their traits, we inhabit some of what they do, and we live because they were bigger, so they help us fight.
Mayans.
No, fight the British and the French.
Ah, so here you were fighting the British and the French.
Exactly.
Ah, man, no tenía ninguna idea.
No man, I could teach you about this.
Guys, that's insane,
You
man.
have internet, you could touch the internet, I appear in the internet.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
What's your name?
Philip Flores.
Philip Flores.
Yeah, man.
Guys, that's insane.
Original name of here is La Buga.
La Buga, no Livingston.
Livingston is
From
later
British.
applied, but the name here originally is La Buga. You come to a unique culture, bruh.
So it's unique in the whole world, no?
It's unique. Our system, the way, our food, our music, everything is completely.
Reggaeton, no. There's no reggaeton aquí.
Huh?
No reggaeton aquí. Reggaeton, no.
No, reggaeton, our music here is punta.
Punta is your music.
Punta rock, yeah.
Samba?
Punta rock.
Punta rock.
We have our own musical identity here.
So if I come tomorrow here, maybe I see you.
Yeah, you see me.
Felipe Flores. Felipe Flores. Gracias, amigo. Gracias.
It's a whole lot of things since you're traveling.
That's insane. Insane story.
It you to learn about what's here. But these guys cannot teach you. They don't expound on their culture.
So what they do, those guias, if I go with them?
They take you to the foreign hotel. This is what they're selling you.
The hotel for the gringos.
Yeah. This is what they're selling you. The gringos pay them $5 or $10 for taking you there. This is what they're selling you. They're not talking about their
culture.
But take your time. We could meet tomorrow here and talk.
But is there racism between the black and the Mayans?
Economic racism.
But not against the race, only economic.
No, it's economic.
They make more money. Really?
They're the one who owns the businesses. But I gotta get out of here. I'm going to play dominoes.
Mañana voy a venir aquí. Si te veo, vamos una vuelta.
Yeah, man, look for me.
Sí. Gracias, bro.
What's your name?
Tim.
Tim.
Timothy.
Yeah, man.
Ciao, man. Guys, after this introduction, I don't have to say to you anything about this place. You got all the informations. This is the only place in Guatemala that black people live. That's why I wanted to come here and show you. But now Mr. Felipe said everything, so I think it's way better him to tell you what's happening here than me, just a random guy. Tomorrow we're gonna explore more, but for now, let's enjoy the fried chicken, which is very, very good. Guys, this cost $2. Hola amigo, ¿cómo estás? Bien. Gracias. Guys, $2. That's insane. After I finish my meal, as a typical Greek guy, I need my coffee. So I just ordered a coffee here in the Comedor de Annie, the Mari, sorry. And look what they gave me. A piece of
I see of flats a long time ago. But now, we're going extinct. All these businesses, there's no blacks working. It's all Mayans. My culture is totally going
gone.
kaput. We're trying to save little bit. I'm a leader here.
Oh yeah.
I'm Philip Flores. If you look in the internet and the books, I'm in the Lonely Planet, the Rough Guy.
Ah, really?
Yeah, man. We're fighting to save much of what is left of Garifuna. They use Garifuna to pull tourists. But when you read all the books, everything, when you go Livingston, you will see a different culture, a whole different anomaly. That is used, we're just being used as a puller.
But not.
But when you get here, you say to yourself, where are they? Because we don't exist. It's like we're non-existent. When you guys come, the first thing they pull you on that side to the foreign hotels. So you support them.
Right.
But they're not in cahoots with us to say, oh man, you guys should go see the Garifuna. They're selling you waterfalls, they're selling you white beach, they're selling you their product. They don't include us, we are totally out of it. Right now, we're fighting to save the educative system, the Garifuna language, the Garifuna way of doing things. You know, our cuisine, our art, our culture is totally not here. This is all Chinese. So you come here to see Garifuna.
Yeah.
Very interesting. What do you know about Garifuna?
I know a little bit about the language.
What is the language?
Garif. But I'm trying to find just some speakers that can talk about the language like you are right now. And
the language has totally gone kaput. That language there is It's very little left with the language. We're more speaking French.
More French.
The Garifuna is French. When the
Yeah,
French
like the
help-
numbers, right?
the numbers, the weekdays, lundi, mardi, jeudi, mercredi, vendredi, samedi. Most of the words, window, fenêtre, you know, à midi, the names of the animals. The French was a higher language at that time, so
Right.
so the people aspired to speak French. So most of the French, when they help us out in the war against the British, Abuti, Magalati. Okay, where are you? Malaput wabu? No, es que that language is a mixture of French and Arawak.
Right.
The Arawak.
And Carib, right? A little Carib.
Why Carib?
I think, were they like mixing with the islanders? Is that it?
Who are the Carib?
They're from South America, right? Or like the Guyanas?
Yeah.
The
Well, who are they?
I'm not sure.
You have to do your history, friend.
Yeah.
Where do you think the black people here come from?
I don't, I'm not sure. It's either like slave ship or they came from Africa, right? What do you think?
We've never been African.
Never.
We've never been African.
They don't really say on...
We're not really Africans. We are the Caribs.
Right.
We are the Caribs.
Maybe.
Our ancestors are the Caribs. We man this. We control this. We inhabited this.
Yeah.
The sea was named for us, the Caribbean. We are the Caribs. The Africans came after. They came around the Cape Horn. They had, coming from Africa, they had to come to 5 different seas to come into around the Cape Horn in Brazil.
Right.
The Africans you find, Jamaica, African, Cuba, African, Haiti, African. But they don't speak, they can't speak Carib nor Garifuna, they don't speak Arawak. They speak Patois.
Creoles and Patois.
They do Patois. You know, that's a whole different, that's a mixed Creole. A mix of African and English. Instead of saying where you're going, they say where you're going. Instead of saying come here, they say Koya. Who is there? Who did they? That's a Creole. That are the African.
Right.
Right? My language is completely different from that.
Yeah, it's Arawak.
You know, the Jamaica, when you're hearing people say Ayasata Masagana, that's a whole complete different language.
Completely.
They have to adhere to the white man's language. They be whipped. So in order to get that whip away from, I have to try and understand you.
It makes sense.
I'm the historian.
I like
here.
it.
It's by fluke we met, but you have
good.
internet?
Yeah, we do.
Look at Google Philip Flores.
Philip Flores, is that?
Yeah, Google, just look. My name is PHILIP FLORES of Livingston. Of
That's
Livingston. Look for it.
How many people speak Garifuna here? Do you
We're
know?
only 12,000 here.
12,000. And do all of them speak, or is it?
We're fighting to teach that right now.
Right.
Let me? I'm right there.
Awesome.
I don't lie, Sam. I won't lie to you because this is why I deal with truth.
Yeah.
Everything there is I've been there. It's a lot of people put me in blogs there. I just before I went to Germany on a symposium, I'm in those things there because we hold symposium about
You do some speaking? Yeah. You do some speeches?
Yeah.
Yeah. He has a YouTube channel, TJ. His name's TJ.
DJ.
It's called the Planet Project, and the purpose of the channel is to identify cultures and languages like yours that are at risk or endangered, and to
Well, this is really as
recognizing Europeans in the Americas and in Southern Africa. In the interest of time, I want to do this by images. I hope that this setup works. If not, you're going to have to imagine what I'm saying. And I'll give the briefest of remarks about 3 historical spaces on which my thoughts have been focused over the past decade. And we might be able to return to some of them later or on another occasion. The first set is going to be about Dutch Brazil and the early 17th century sugar plantations. The second set is from New England to the Caribbean. And the third set is Long Island, from Long Island to Providence, and the Harlem Renaissance. And we'll see if this actually works. Yeah, okay. Except that's not the right one. It's okay. These are just covers of the kinds of natural histories, in other words, the colonial archive that I spend a lot of time looking at. So you get very old histories of the first European natural historian who goes to Barbados or to Jamaica or to Brazil or to Haiti. A lot of these are actually held in here, original copies, in the John Carter Brown Library. I want to spend a moment on this one, which is from Brazil. This is actually the first natural history of Brazil. You can see the European imagination working and how they see the Native Americans, or the Tupi-Namba people, as they call themselves, in Brazil. And the interesting thing about this old first natural history of Brazil for me is that I'm always thinking about the knowledge of plants, so the knowledge that enslaved Africans, and in this case in Brazil, the enslaved Tupi-Namba, because everywhere in Latin America, it's first the Native Americans who were enslaved, and then when that doesn't work in some kind of way, Africans are brought in. So the reason why this book is important, done by Willem Piso and George Margraaf, is that it was done in the time when the Dutch briefly held Brazil. Now, we know Brazil is a Portuguese colony, but in the 1640s, the Dutch were holding Brazil, and the governor, Count Moritz of Nassau, thought it important to do scientific studies. So he brings over Willem Piso to look at questions of plants and the knowledge about plants. And in this time, we remember that the knowledge about plants is like knowing where gold and diamonds and oil are later on in history. So Piso does this book. And what do you find when you see the book is that the Tupi-Namba and the enslaved Africans are there on these early sugar plantations at the same time, and they're exchanging knowledge with each other. Most of the book is about what he calls the simples, which are the medicinal plants, the herbal medicines of the Tupi-Namba. But occasionally you find a page like this one that's shown there, where he reports that the Africans are teaching the Indians how, or the indigenous people, how to use particular plants. And so you begin to get a notion of the plants that the Africans managed to bring over, or that were brought over in the slave ship, like sesame, eggplant, and okra. And you also get a sense of how the Tupi-Namba are teaching the enslaved Africans about some very important plants, usually maize, but also cassava, which is the bread of the Caribbean. It's the bread of the Tainos, it's the bread of the Brazilians. The terms that were being used by the Portuguese and the Dutch at this time are also interesting. They called the Tupi-Namba in the beginning, when they enslaved them, negros da terra, the blacks of this land. And the ones who were coming in from Guinea and from Angola, and that's the first set, they are negros de Guinea and negros de Angola. It's an interesting use of the notion of color and slavery. And the picture on the lower right, what you see is, it looks like they're trying to depict Africans, but actually this is an early depiction of Tupi-Namba, who are enslaved and who are put to producing the bread, this bread called cazabe or cassava, depends on which part of the Caribbean or Latin America you're in. And these were first enslaved Tupi-Namba who have to produce this bread. So for me, this is an interesting evidence of not just the enslavement, joint enslavement side by side of Native Americans and enslaved Africans, but also of the knowledge they exchanged and the knowledge and the wealth of knowledge that they bring to the colonizers. This picture is a picture in Africa of Angola, the city of Luanda, and at the same time that the Dutch are holding this tip of Brazil as part of their empire, they're also briefly in charge of or colonizing the Angola Kingdom. They never get quite to colonize the Congo Kingdom, but the Angola Kingdom in Luanda. This is the oldest fort, one of the oldest forts on the coast of Africa. It's San Miguel de Luanda, built in 1576. And the interesting thing is that when the Dutch, built by the Portuguese, when the Dutch take Luanda briefly in the 1640s, they bring over Tupi Namba masons, stone masons, sailors on the boats. And some of those Tupi Namba escape altogether. They melt into the kingdoms, what were then the kingdoms of Congo and Ndongo. So one interesting research question for me is sort of like the disappeared Taino. Where did these people go? And what would thinking about them teach us about slavery and the relations among Africans and Native Americans with respect to slavery, and not just slavery. This is a picture with which I'm sure it depicts things that most people in this region would be familiar with, which is the massacre of the Pequot in 1937 in Connecticut. This is one of the beginnings of a massive deportation of Native American people from New England to the Caribbean. So it then posits another question: where did these people go? They go to everywhere in the Caribbean. They go to the Bahamas, they go to Barbados, they go to Jamaica. So when I was a child, probably like many of you who are at least my age or older, we were always taught the Indians, the Native Americans, are largely disappeared. I have there a quote from Herman Melville, the book that we all had to read in school, Moby Dick, where he says, you know, the name of the boat, the ship is the Pequot, first of all, and we don't even know why it's the Pequot when we're reading it. But he says, you will no doubt remember, the Pequot was the name of a celebrated tribe of Massachusetts Indians now extinct as the ancient Medes. So he's writing this in 1851, but these supposedly extinct people, many of them are not just still here in New England, but are also in the Caribbean. And in fact, one of the things that was most astonishing to me in trying to do the research of Black people, I'm sure it depicts things that most people in this region would be familiar with, which is the massacre of the Pequot in 1937 in Connecticut. This is one of the beginnings of a massive deportation of Native American people from New England to the Caribbean. So it then posits another question: where did these people go? They go to everywhere in the Caribbean. They go to the Bahamas, they go to Barbados, they go to Jamaica. So when I was a child, probably like many of you who are at least my age or older, we were always taught the Indians, the Native Americans, are largely disappeared. I have there a quote from Herman Melville, the book that we all had to read in school, Moby Dick, where he says, you know, the name of the boat, the ship is the Pequot, first of all, and we don't even know why it's the Pequot when we're reading it. But he says, you will no doubt remember, the Pequot was the name of a celebrated tribe of Massachusetts Indians now extinct as the ancient Medes. So he's writing this in 1851, but these supposedly extinct people, many of them are not just still here in New England, but are also in the Caribbean. And in fact, one of the things that was most astonishing to me in trying to do the research of Black people and Native Americans side by side in this question of slavery is an intra-American slave trade that went on in the Caribbean, a waterborne traffic. They didn't cross the Atlantic, but was going around in the Caribbean, was a very, very large flow of slavery. The estimate now is that over a period of 400 years, more than 2.5 million native persons, many of them from New England, were in slavery in the Caribbean. This is besides the Taino who lived there. This is another set. And this saltwater trade expelled them all over the Caribbean, to Little Bonaire and Curacao, to the many small Lucayas, to Hispaniola, and to Puerto Rico. In fact, one study done by Resendez, which is called The Other Slavery, is that in the period between 1670 and 1720, from the Carolinas, South Carolina in particular, more Indians were exported out of Charleston, South Carolina, than Africans were imported into Charleston, South Carolina. So one of the chief things that I've been doing in trying to do research about botanical knowledge in the Caribbean is looking at this question of Black people and Native Americans, or enslaved Africans and enslaved Native Americans, living side by side during a period when we were told, at least when I was in school, that all these people had disappeared. So you get, for example, the famous work by Hans Sloane in Jamaica. And if you read the archive, if you read the original, which many of these originals are in Brown's JCB library, you get this understanding that these supposedly disappeared Indians and these enslaved Africans are actually living side by side for quite some time in many of the Caribbean countries. This is a quote just from Jamaica, from the Natural History of Jamaica done by one Hans Sloane, in which he talks over and over again about the Indians and the Negroes, the Indians and the Negroes, even Indian and Negro doctors, and the diseases that they were able to cure using plants that were natural to Jamaica. And deep inside the book, the Hans Sloane book, is an account of a Lucaya, which is the other name for the Bahamas, a Lucaya couple enslaved in Hispaniola, and how they tried to get away. And then they returned to slavery. So you have to ask yourself, we all learn in school about how Native Americans disappeared in the United States, supposedly, how they disappeared as well in the Caribbean, but they show up over and over again in these natural histories. So one of the things that also shows up in these old colonial histories is a question of Native American revolt, enslaved African revolt, and how afraid the colonists up and down the East Coast and down into the Caribbean were of this revolt. So in 1502, you get one of the earliest ones where the Spanish governor of Hispaniola asks the King of Spain, essentially he just says, please don't send me any more of these African slaves. Let's have a moratorium, because they run away to the mountains of Hispaniola, which today is Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and they don't come back. And furthermore, they pair up with the Native Americans who are the Taino who are fleeing, and we don't know what's going on up in the mountains, but it's dangerous, so let's just have a moratorium. You move to 1676, and this is from a study done by Professor Linford. Yeah, where are you? I think he's here somewhere. Exactly. One of his early studies, because he continues to do this work. Dangerous Designs, the 1676 Barbados Act to prohibit New England Indian slave importation. They were by now very, very afraid of these Native American revolt, enslaved African revolt, and how afraid the colonists up and down the East Coast and down into the Caribbean were of this revolt. So in 1502, you get one of the earliest ones where the Spanish governor of Hispaniola asks the King of Spain, essentially he just says, please don't send me any more of these African slaves. Let's have a moratorium, because they run away to the mountains of Hispaniola, which today is Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and they don't come back. And furthermore, they pair up with the Native Americans who are the Taino who are fleeing, and we don't know what's going on up in the mountains, but it's dangerous, so let's just have a moratorium. You move to 1676, and this is from a study done by Professor Linford. Yeah, where are you? I think he's here somewhere. Exactly. One of his early studies, because he continues to do this work. Dangerous Designs, the 1676 Barbados Act to prohibit New England Indian slave importation. They were by now very, very afraid of these Native Americans who had revolted and who almost won the war in this region. And so several thousands of them are deported. And The governor down in Barbados says that, he really doesn't want any more of these. Many of them are already there, but he says he really doesn't want any more of these because it's like a contagion to have them. These Native American uprisings that are taking place in Virginia and Maryland and New York, and now these people are deported or sold down into the Caribbean and causing trouble. This happens over and over again in the Caribbean. The quote at the bottom is from a famous Caribbean poet and historian, Kamal Brathwaite, and he writes a poem about, just part of it, is about the Maroon Coast in Barbados, which many people think, there weren't any Native Americans left there. And he writes about the ones that got away, the ones that found a settlement somewhere on the coast, which they call the Maroon Coast of Barbados. And he talks about how they got away and how important it is that they found their freedom. Done something wrong. Yes. So the reason why this is called Native Revolt, Black Revolt, and Colonial Fears is that this question of Native Americans and not yet African Americans, but enslaved Africans joining together in possible revolt was one of the biggest fears of colonial times. Finally, I want to talk about briefly about, how shall I call this? By then, this is a question of a cultural resistance, is basically what we're left with in the New England area. And this woman, usually you get to see histories about, what's the name? Cuffey? Paul Cuffey, yes. So I thought I would use a woman instead of Paul Cuffey because he's fairly well known. This lady is called Olivia Ward Bush, and she was both Native American and African American, and she writes a very famous poem, at least famous in the time, in 1898 in Newport, called Driftwood. And although it's a fairly sad-seeming poem, it's actually a poem about resistance. It's actually a poem about the fact that, like Driftwood, the Native Americans, who by then are very much mixed in this area of New England with African Americans, still managed to endure. And in the final part, she says that with their lives, some poor misshapen remnant still survives of what was once a fair and beauteous form, and yet some dwelling may be more bright. Someone afar may catch a gleam of light after the fury of the blighting storm. This poem is actually a poem about resilience of Native Americans in this New England region. So I want to close with that. I actually had closed with something else, but I didn't bring it with me, which is a weaving, a carving that the Narragansett have kept for a long time, a weaving, which is about the dispersal of the Narragansett through the Caribbean, because I think that also speaks to a kind of history that we want to understand more. So, in conclusion, I want to close with what I hope that some of what I've sketched tonight leads us to think about. The kinds of projects where the historians of the nations and communities, the colonial archives, and a rereading not just of the secrets buried in the soil, but the wisdom inserted in poems and songs, in weavings and carvings, might bring us a greater understanding of the historical phenomenon of Indian slavery in the Americas. I want to suggest that this could lead us not just to new histories of what my friends on the Bahian coast of Brazil call the people of the waters, but new works on the nature of rebellion and revolts for freedom and for sovereignty in the Americas, from the eastern woodlands to Barbados and...
Do you mind?
No.
What has it meant to you to learn about your traditions? And have the Taino people disappeared? And what are they doing now?
Well, I'm a little, I'm kind of an exception. My parents wanted to never forget my Taino roots by naming me Taino. My sisters have Taino names. My middle sister, her name is Guanina, which is a play on the Guanina region by which we come from. My middle sister.
As far as the importation of African slaves, and then you said there was the exportation of American slaves here in New England as well as in South Carolina. I'm just curious as to what was, or how did they classify these individuals when they moved them from here to other locales? Did they still call them Indians, or they classify them as just a colored race?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, but I'll give a general discussion of classification, and then people can correct me. In the early records, you see people classified by the names of their nations, and I mean Native American nations. As time goes on, you begin to see them classified as things like Mustee. And after a while, you begin to see those who are mixed African and Native American get progressively classified out of the Native American part of their heritage. You begin to get a loss of people's names from the nations from which they come, and they get classified as Indian, and you get a progressive moving out of people who are part Native American, part African American into African American. So the time that in the time that I was talking about, which is kind of an earlier colonial period, some of those names still would have been used, but when they get to the Caribbean is when they really get lost into just being called the Indians, because these are exported from the United States because of the rebellions and the revolts, and sold into the Caribbean, where they practically disappear in some of the places that they were expelled to. And that's a different case from the Taino, who always lived there. This is where they were from. But the ones who were expelled from the United States, parts of the coast down, and they gradually kind of disappear into the population, intermarrying with enslaved Africans primarily, in the case of the Caribbean. In the case of enslaved Africans, a lot of times the classification comes out of the port by which they left Africa and come to the New World. It doesn't mean that those people are necessarily from that area. They could be in the general hinterland and then get that name and come. In the case of Native Americans, it's different. The one that I showed for Brazil, remember, this is very early Brazil. This is like early 1600s. Brazil is founded as a colony in the 1500s. And this expression, negros da terra, blacks of this land, is something that the Portuguese made up. The names of the people who lived in the area are on the coast, especially, were Tupi, Tupinamba, and others, as you go further into the Brazilian interior. But all along the coast, those people were Tupi. So to call them negros da terra is something that the Portuguese, or let's say the Spanish and the Portuguese, are beginning to do a classification as they wish to classify people. So they're classifying them as blacks of this land. And then the ones who are being brought in slightly later from Africa are classified as blacks from Guinea or blacks from Angola. Those would be the two earliest for this place. But you are right. Your implication is that these names are mixed up, made up, and in time replace the actual names that the people call themselves.
Yeah. Thank
you. I greet you. Shalom. Yeah. So, we know that we had slavery, right? We know that we experienced slavery between Africa, Europe, North America, and South America, And this slave trade was called the Triangle Slavery Trade, or the Triangular Slave Trade, because it took place between 3 or 4 continents, but mostly between 3 continents. So it was forming something like a triangle on the Atlantic trade. Some call it the transatlantic trade, which is true. It took place along the transatlantic. However, there is history that we are not being told. There is a history that we are not told. And one thing you must understand is that historians, the people who write this history, are very selective. They are stereotypical. they are subjective, they are biased. These people write history that they want to favor them. They write history that they want to put themselves in the position of attaining mass empathy. And so some things might happen that they will not show you. But nature has a way of restoring history. Nature has a way of keeping documentation of what happened within itself. In as much as they might try to hide the history that happened from the general community, we still find ways of finding the truth. That is why we have people like archaeologists. Archaeologists are here to dig, are here to extract, they are here to tell us history, how it always been. For example, during the shipment, or rather during the movement of the Israelites from Egypt to Israel, they had to cross the Red Sea. It was just recently that it was discovered the remnants of the Pharaoh's wheels. Those, Kitambo, they used to use chariots, and Pharaoh was following the Israelites with chariots. Now, as they were chasing them along this split Red Sea, God closed it and they got drowned. Historians never ever accepted this fact. It was just up until recently that archaeologists found these remnants. They found the wheel of a huge chariot. We didn't have cars in the past, it was chariots. And the design of the chariot, of that wheel, was likened to the Pharaoh of that time during Moses. It is called the long expedition. Okay, let's forget about this. We have this Black American professor who is like our archaeologist. She tells us that let's stop believing everything that we read. Let's start believing on the facts. Let's start believing on the empirical evidence that shows black people and Indians, or rather Indians or Red Indians, the way you choose to call them, collaborated with the black people and they fought against the slave master. This is history that is not told because someone somewhere does not want to show himself losing. They want to show themselves winning. And now I want us to watch this video, listen to what the professor has to say, and then by the end of the video, I shall share with you my thoughts, where we shall also have a deep critical analysis.
I learned two things from my elders, both here and in Africa, that are very important to me. And so I want to begin my remarks with those two things. The first thing is that whenever you are standing on